Sorry, I have to leave. They said it's a felony for me to do this. Apparently, I can't be on the floor or in the bathroom. Well, you told me I was only allowed to be here in the bathroom. No, hang on. Bye, everybody. I've got to go.
Representative Collier was supposed to join us tonight. She is still on the House floor as this all unfolds right here in real time. We're going to talk to her as soon as is possible. But for now, joining us, Texas State Representative John Busey III. He represents parts of Austin. Also with us, John Bisignano, president of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee.
Representative Busey, I don't even want to know where to begin. I'm sitting here outside of the state of Texas watching the crass, gross behavior of Republican legislators in their treatment of their colleagues, in their roughshod efforts to just steal an election without making a case for the American people. I was heartened to hear Representative Wu, though, note a couple of things. One, that, you know, if we don't stand up right now because these leaders of the party, of the Republican Party in the state, don't give a damn, we will lose a lot more than you believe. Two was the fact that folks are beginning to rally. Citizens are starting to rally, which, of course, is irking the hell out of Republicans because now that's another layer they have to contend with. What will you say? What's going on in terms of voters out there? How are they responding to this? And what does it look like once this vote is over? What comes next?
You know, I'm actually coming from you from the House floor because we're being detained, all of us, by police. They won't let us leave. I'm not in my office, so I had to come find a back room to do this interview. One, I want to say I'm so grateful that people are getting to know the great Nicole Collier. She's former chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. She's an attorney. She's a 7-term state representative, and they have spent the last 2 days keeping her detained and locked up in the House chamber. She has to ask permission to go to the bathroom. This is absurd that this is happening in America. I also would just want to say I'm so proud to be a Texas Democrat, all 62 of us showing our fight today, standing up to these racist rigged maps. And then finally, I want to say I'm sad for the people of America because Donald Trump, with the help of Texas Republicans, stole 5 congressional seats today, and they are silencing the voice of Americans. But as your question asks, what are people saying? They are responding to us. They're standing up and they're fighting back and they're joining us. And we know that they can do whatever they want to try to rig the game. The people of America will not let them get away with it.
John, you've been doing this work for a long time, and I'm curious, as you hear what the representative just said, that we are being detained, that they had, you know, security with them to make sure they wouldn't leave the state, which they are constitutionally, it's in the Constitution of Texas that they are allowed to do so, to break quorum. This feels like it should be red blaring sirens in this country, both in Texas and in this country, that these people can't do their jobs, right? That they are being detained by police officers, by some officers. It seems crazy, but people seem a little too calm for my liking.
Yeah, I mean, this country thrives on checks and balances, right? Everything is built on the proposal that we have checks and balances within this country. And what you're seeing completely eroded in Texas right now is that reality in which a governor is able to completely shut down an entire party. And I know folks throw around the word authoritarianism and fascism. And the part that's really troubling and real and frustrating is that those words mean a small group of people is able to make the decisions for you. And that's what we're seeing right now in Texas. We're seeing a small group of people, just Republican legislators in Texas. You look at polling, no people want this. No citizens, no voters. Gerrymandering polls around 70% against every time. Yet in Texas, there's a small group of people, and I include Donald Trump and Greg Abbott in that group, to say, we are going to decide what happens here, and we're going to tell you exactly what's going to happen.
Let's take a look at that poll, one of those polls, Representative. This is from Emerson College. The question was, do you support or oppose the proposal to redraw Texas's congressional map ahead of the midterms? You only had 36% of Texans saying they supported that, 38% saying they opposed it, and 26% saying they were unsure, which seems to me like an opportunity for you and other Democrats to prosecute your case with Texas voters.
Absolutely. Look, Donald Trump is one of the most unpopular presidents in modern times. He's down to 37% approval rating. He knows that he is going to lose in the midterms. That's why he's trying to rig the maps instead of change his policies to serve the people. He's a disgrace. Greg Abbott is a disgrace. and Texas Republicans have failed the people, but the people are paying attention. And come the midterm election, they're going to march to the ballot box and they're going to fight back with the best way we can. And that's by electing new leadership for this country.
Representative, is there any conversation, because you have other states like California starting to play a role here, which I think is important, and other states are as well looking at it, although there's still some nervous Nellies out there who just can't seem to understand the moment and are, want to kind of wringing their hands. But in the face of all of that, here's the reality, and I'd like you to speak to it. Texas may steal 5 congressional seats, but Democrats nationwide are poised a year out. Now, everything changes. We know that. But given the trajectory of things, it's poised to do very well, more than making up for the 5 seats stolen. Is there any discussion and consideration of that, as well as what do you do after this happens? I mean, there's a process, I'm sure, right, where it's not automatic. You still have to get the map approved, or they have to do the implementation on the ground with the various legislative districts, et cetera. But there's a potential court challenge. So you do have these two things, the reality that you still got to run an election and actually win those seats, in addition to the other seats that you're going to be contested on nationwide. But also you can slow this process down by dragging this into the courts and having it adjudicated there as well. True?
Absolutely. And we will definitely be doing that. We're going to take this fight to the courts, and then we're going to take this fight to every single race. We're not going to concede a single congressional seat. We're going to go talk to the voters, and we're going to talk about what Donald Trump and Greg Abbott did today, what they did to silence their voice and steal the election. And we're going to make every race a fight. We're going to do everything we can. And with that, I want to say, for people that are sitting on the sidelines, or members in California that are scared to do this, Donald Trump and Greg Abbott are breaking the rules right now. I am proud that California is ready to step up and fight back. We need everybody, Democrat, Independent, Republican. If you love this country and if you believe that the table should be big enough for all of us, we all have to stand up and fight back right now. We have to do our part. Get off the sideline and push. Barack Obama called on the actions of California today in support. I'm proud of that, and we must all join in that chorus, because this is not a game. They will take away our freedom. They will take away our voice. We have to push back.
John, I want to play some sound from Texas State Representative Todd Hunter, Republican, and get your response on the other side.
The underlying goal of this plan is straightforward: improve Republican political performance. Each of these newly drawn districts now trend Republican in political performance. While there's no guarantee of an electorate success, Republicans will now have an opportunity to potentially win these districts.
Eugene, do we give them credit for saying the quiet part out loud?
That's exactly that's the question, right? Because at the end of the day,
they can't help themselves.
You cannot say they didn't tell us. You can't say they're hiding the ball, John, right? From the very beginning, they've been clear about this. They've been clear that this is about making it easier for them in Texas to win elections. Is that better, so that the folks that want to make sure that things are more equal can get the horses together, can be ready to ride?
No,
let's
it's
talk about what they really do. Oh, I'm sorry.
I think what we've seen happen with the representative is he clearly walked out of a room with a lawyer that told him so specifically, don't say racial gerrymandering, say political, and just keep saying it over and over until you fall down. And the reality is, in truth, what they're doing is racial gerrymandering. And they can say this is political all they want. And sure, I'm sure they have political motives, but that doesn't change what the effects are on racial dynamics in the state. There are actual people that will be affected by this map. And those people will be used in court cases as statistics. I think it's very clear when you hear somebody continually iterate the same thing over and over, they're just trying to hide the reality that they're diluting new racial growth and population in the state with these maps. And I just want to say one more thing about these maps. They are a gerrymander on top of a gerrymander. This is an already gerrymandered map. The National Redistricting Foundation has been in court for the past 3 years adjudicating this map. And currently, we find ourselves in place to do so again and continue on these new extraordinarily racially gerrymandered maps.
We have an eye on what's happening in Texas and a bit of a fact check for all the people who said concerns about democracy or authoritarianism in last year's campaign against Donald Trump were overblown. Quite the opposite. Indeed, you don't have to take anybody's word for it. You can see it happening out of Trump's own mouth and in the action on the ground in Texas. You can also look to the vocal backlash to what many people view as an effort out in the open, starting far earlier than some of Trump's last efforts when he was in the first term, which were closer to the election. Now, we are a long ways away from the midterms, let alone another presidential. And yet, it's happening and earlier. And people are against it because democracy remains pretty popular. From town hall protests to Vice President Vance and Defense Secretary Hegseth, now getting an earful today in Washington. There are a range of concerns, and we can't always interpret boos exactly by their intent, but democracy is one of the big issues. Texas Democrats are also trying to stand up against something that most modern Republicans would have criticized any time before the MAGA era, and that they certainly still are suing to stop when it happens to them in California. But this is what Republicans are doing. A blatant power grab in an off-year, unusual time to carry out what Trump demanded, to change the rules in the middle of the game to try to get more seats because they are worried about losing a free and fair election in these upcoming midterms. So California Democrats are saying it's time or past time to fight fire with fire. If Republicans are able to strong-arm these tactics in Texas, California Dems, led by Governor Newsom, say they will cancel it right out using their powers in real time. No more long-winded speeches about precedent and declining republic. They are going to do what they say they need to do to blunt what looks like a very abusive, precedent-breaking effort to redraw and kind of basically steal some of these districts in Texas. So that's one way to go at this. Trump, meanwhile, has been very blunt. He thinks that what he's doing is working. He's been censoring and attacking free speech. He's been threatening. We know all that. He's got a Justice Department that's going after some of his political opponents. And he's made false claims that are blatant. He's going after mail-in voting. And then he's been doing an old Trump style of laundering and raising things and then saying, oh, he's only joking. Russia, if you're listening. And then his aides say it was a joke. That was the very first campaign. We're way past all of that. And so joking, or maybe not, about canceling elections in wartime as he meets with a wartime leader, or toying with the idea of an illegal, unconstitutional third term, something that the Supreme Court and courts have never allowed, so he wouldn't even usually be able to get on the ballot. And yet, amidst these other campaigns I'm telling you about, he continues to muse about doing something that is flatly banned under our Constitution.
You know, Vladimir Putin said something, one of the most interesting things. He said your election was rigged because you have mail-in voting. So you mean if we happen to be in a war with somebody, no more elections? Oh, that's good. I wonder what the fake news
like this idea?
Yeah.
No.
Speaking of, we got a long time to go. We have a long time. You know, we have almost 4 years to go, and that's a long time. But despite that, so many people are saying you've got to run again.
Who's saying that? Why is he doing that? Is it to move the goalposts and then act like it's a compromise if he doesn't run for a third term and make other ongoing efforts to kneecap democracy look somehow smaller, kind of an expanding of the authoritarian Overton window, as some of the political scientists say? Or is he just getting ready to try to see if he can break the whole thing and run for a third term, turn this country into a dictatorship? And you say, oh, wait a minute, that sounds extreme. It is extreme. But don't let them trick you into word games and rhetoric or trying to shoot the messenger or go after the media, which we've seen in many countries and we see right now in this one. Because what we're talking about is what Donald Trump says and does. We're not talking about, it doesn't even always matter how I describe it to you, as long as you can get the facts and evidence and make sure you're getting reliable information, which is what we do around here, what we practice. So forget the word dictator or the word authoritarian for a moment if you want to, and remember that Donald Trump did not leave office peacefully last time. That is the great stain on him, regardless of anything else you like or dislike about him. And we've reported before, there are things that he says and does that many people in the country like. That's fine. He won more votes in the last election. That's fine. But he also trafficked in, supported, and then pardoned people convicted of the crimes against the United States, attacking police, sedition, pardoning every last Jan 6 attacker.
The plan was simply this. We had over 100 congressmen and senators on Capitol Hill ready to implement the sweep.
Do you realize you are describing a coup?
No.
If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned.
J.D. Vance, welcome to your new life. Yesterday, Donald Trump commuted the sentences of and pardoned everyone, from the most violent criminals who participated in the insurrection to those convicted of lesser offenses.
There has been no greater embrace in the modern era of people who attacked police and tried to overthrow democracy than those pardons. Pardons so extreme that now they've happened and people got used to it. That's part of being alive. People can get used to a lot of things. But so extreme that J.D. Vance, then Vice President-elect, was saying in public, well, obviously, not all of the people who attacked. Yes, all of them. And that is the context for other things Donald Trump is doing that are not technically currently illegal. For example, the show of force in Washington is still within the legal limit of basically a month limit on that. I'm not going to get into all the details, so I'm not telling you it's technically illegal right now, although he's been testing it in California and there, and he may try to blow past that deadline. But the wider impact is a federal government using a show of force, pushing others to the side, using ICE raids not only to do immigration enforcement, which again is part of their work, but showing up at opposition party members' press conferences, sometimes getting involved in arresting them. Some of those cases dropped, others continue. The show of force is linked to the attacks on democracy. And now Republican governors say they want in. Remember, there's not a bunch of riots right now in the country. This is not historically a time where you'd have National Guard troops. And while the numbers you see are relatively small, we're showing you Republicans doing this again as kind of a little step, because who really wants to debate 135 personnel? The point is to get it started, just as Trump started in California and D.C., and now we're seeing Republican governors test this. If you don't think that this is a risk for being abused around election time, you haven't been paying attention. Meanwhile, the people being patrolled are concerned. From the nation's capital to California to Texas, this is what it looks like when the attacks on democracy get more physical into the streets, encroaching, while legislatures try to redraw the maps to prevent what? A free and fair midterm election that might dislodge one aspect of a Republican agenda right now, that from Trump to the anti-health care bill that came out of Washington to the ongoing secrecy over Epstein, an agenda that remains very unpopular around the nation.
It's all just stress testing, right? And it leaks out not just from this White House, but at the state level. So from the White House, you have sending in military troops into Los Angeles, waiting to see what courts say, because if the courts say that's allowed, they will continue to do that in other cities. You see them stripping funding from Washington, D.C., and then federalizing the police and seeing how long they can do it and running the possibility of extending the 30-day deadline. And then what do you see happening in Texas? Locking members of the legislature in a building or forcing them to sign permission slips. All of the authoritarian urges of this administration are leaking out. So whether it's legal or illegal, it is definitely against the spirit of democracy that everyone, except people in this White House, have lived with for our entire lives.
Molly?
I think also it's important to remember that intimidation plays a big part here. This is the District of Columbia. They feel they can do it because it's not a state technically, so it is legal. But I also think there really is, this is a city that is majority minority, 90% voted for Democrats, filled with media and a lot of Democratic politicians and a lot of judiciary. So these are groups that they really want to keep in line and intimidate. So I think that's a real thing, too. Also, I want to add these checkpoints that they have. where the use, it's technically legal to do checkpoints for sobriety and for car accidents, but checkpoints just because somebody is annoying you or someone doesn't look the way you want them to, that is very much out of the mainstream.
Right, and it's testing it and encroaching on it, as we've seen. Jason, the absence of bad news is not good news. But I have something that is less bad news, low bar. But we had the Democratic leader, Jeffries, on this program, and we asked him exactly about these issues. And he's doing what he can within the minority powers that he has. But he also made a point that's just a sad autocratic math. It's not good news. But here's what he said about what is in danger and what might still be protected in the coming midterms.
The good news is, to the extent that there's a silver lining in our electoral system, is that we don't have a national election system. It's state by state by state. And in many of the states where there will be competitive gubernatorial elections, and certainly in the overwhelming majority of the states where the House will be decided, there are Democratic governors, Democratic attorney generals, and Democratic secretaries of state.
I believe it will too, Ari. I just don't know how reliable it'll be. I think sometimes we have to step back from the sort of red state, blue state thing and recognize that there are large numbers of Republicans in blue states and large numbers of Democrats in red states. And so the issue is, will a fair election be allowed at the local level?
People are never going to forget. The problem is, do we have any power? What do we do? What do you do? You definitely can change the way you vote, like if it comes up again. But the problem is, this is a bipartisan issue.
Bipartisan.
Certainly not a hoax if Ghislaine Maxwell's in jail, too. She's in jail for sex trafficking. But the question is, to who? Who's she in jail? You have to be sex trafficking to somebody in order to go to jail, right?
Yeah.
So who? How does that work?
Never stop asking questions. And you have tons of power. You're Joe Rogan. Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in the East. On the scale of momentous and impossible to ignore, Joe Rogan reminding his millions of listeners that they can, quote, change the people they vote for, is a clear sign that Joe Rogan is not going to become Lindsey Graham in this story. He's refusing to buy the BS being peddled by the Trump White House and rescue Donald Trump from a crisis of his own making, his botched handling of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. The scandal has proven to be sticky and a critical flashpoint and growing political nightmare for Donald Trump and his entire administration, as well as Republicans in Congress who, in a sign of weakness, decided to tell everyone they were leaving Washington to go home to hide from the Epstein scandal. Now it is the subject of a significant brand new court ruling that broke late today. The judge overseeing the Epstein case saying he will not unseal the grand jury transcripts and exhibits, rejecting a request by Donald Trump in his bid to appear transparent and quell this political firestorm, bipartisan backlash to his handling of it. In his ruling, Judge Richard Berman writes this today, quote, a significant and compelling reason to reject the government's position in this litigation is that the government has already undertaken a comprehensive investigation into the Epstein case and, not surprisingly, has assembled a, quote, trove of Epstein documents, interviews, and exhibits. And the government committed that it would share its Epstein investigation materials with the public, end quote. Judge Berman also writes this, quote, the information contained in the Epstein grand jury transcripts pales in comparison to the Epstein investigation information and materials in the hands of the Department of Justice. The government is the logical party to make comprehensive disclosure to the public of the Epstein files. By comparison, the instant grand jury motion appears to be a diversion from the breadth and scope of the Epstein files in the government's possession. Judge Berman's ruling coming one day after the Republican chairman of the House Oversight Committee announced his committee intends to release Epstein investigation records to the public, which the Justice Department is expected to begin sharing with members on Friday. As the questions pile up, so too does the political peril for Republicans who could be forced into a vote next month that the New York Times says will, quote, thrust them into a political thorny position between Trump and constituents, with a timetable that, quote, all but guarantees that the issue would hang over lawmakers throughout the August recess and that Republican leaders would be forced to address it when they return. That is where we start the hour. Some of our favorite experts and friends. Voting rights attorney and founder of Democracy Docket, Marc Elias, is here. Plus, former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the Justice Department, Mary McCord, is here. And MSNBC senior contributing editor Michelle Norris is here. Marc Elias, it is something I came to late, but something I now cover enthusiastically, and that is the political import to the Trump coalition and the Republican majority in Congress of support from the manosphere and this culture-adjacent political wing. When you have the ostensible leader of that cultural adjacent movement saying we can, quote, change who we vote for next time, and explaining the nature of a child sex trafficking ring on the air, which was, you've got Ghislaine Maxwell in prison, but there are people she trafficked too, making the very logical point that to be imprisoned for felony child sex trafficking, and I think there are 4 other convictions, conspiracy to commit child sex trafficking and whatnot, you had to have been trafficking children for sex, 2 people. And so his point is simple and not really one to be argued with, because she wouldn't be sitting in prison if she hadn't trafficked girls for sex, 2 people. So where do you think this political crisis for Donald Trump stands today?
So I think that it stands in a hiatus until Congress returns, and then there will be a critical pivot point, as you suggest. The fact is that the Republicans in the House almost certainly are going to have to vote on whether to release the Epstein files. Now, the jujitsu that's starting to play out, you can just already see it, is that the Justice Department is going to selectively send some records to the House committee. Comer is then going to selectively release only some of those records. And I promise you, none of them will include the name Donald Trump. And so they will preemptively say, look, we did the thing that we said we were going to do. Democrats will call it out and say that is not true. And then the question is, where does the politics fall? Does the Trump coalition just say, okay, that's good enough? Or, as I suspect is the case, they say, no, we actually really want all the Epstein files. Like we didn't come this far to just have some of them. And that's where I just think like they have misread the politics of this all along. People may not understand all the nuance of policy. They may not really understand how Medicaid cuts affect them this year versus next year. They may not understand who is telling the truth and not telling the truth about tax cuts. They understand what it means that there was a child sex trafficker in the name of Jeffrey Epstein, that Donald Trump's campaign promised to release those files, that Donald Trump has a reason, some really good reason personal to him, that he doesn't want them released, and that the Republican Party is doing his bidding. That's not a complicated story for people. And so I think ultimately the politics cut in favor of these files having to be released. But I think the question is going to be the way in which the Department of Justice slow walks or selectively releases.
Mary, today's ruling by Judge Berman, nothing short of extraordinary. The judge writing, quote, there is another compelling reason not to unseal the Epstein grand jury materials at this time, namely possible threats to victim safety and privacy. Victims did not have sufficient notice before the government filed the instant motions to unseal. A nod and I think a recentering around the truest part of the story, that the real victims are girls, now women, who were sexually assaulted at the hands of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. Your thoughts on the language that the judge uses today?
So to that point, I'm so glad you've uplifted that, Nicole, because one of the things that bothers me so much about this entire scandal, totally of the Trump administration's own making, when you spin conspiracy theories and then you cannot deliver, they're going to come back on you because now it looks like a cover up. But with all of that swirl, I feel like we don't talk often enough about how many victims, child victims, there were of this. You know, I prosecuted sex crimes in the District of Columbia including child sex crimes. And these are some of the most heinous crimes out there. And people like Ghislaine Maxwell, who enable and traffic to someone, as Joe Rogan said, I mean, they are an integral part of these types of sex trafficking rings. There aren't tons and tons and tons of them, but they exist. And here, of course, we're talking about somebody who had such wealth, such power, such ability, Jeffrey Epstein, to make a convincing case through Ghislaine Maxwell that these girls ought to come and engage in sexualized massages, etc. That is that same sort of power dynamic that you see over and over and over in these types of cases. So I'm really, really glad you uplifted that, and I'm glad that the judge today pointed it out. The other thing I think that is remarkable here is Judge Berman, of course, is not the first judge to basically call out the not lies, but misrepresentations in the Department of Justice's own pleadings seeking to unseal these grand jury transcripts. Judge Paul Engelmeyer, just a few weeks ago, did the same thing, denied the Department of Justice's motion to unseal the transcripts from the Ghislaine Maxwell grand jury and said that the government's representations that these transcripts would be revealing of information that is of significant public interest were, and this is a quote, demonstrably false, which means I guess I was okay saying a lie. Demonstrably false, right? And he says anybody who actually reads these would see that there is no new information there. And the government, of course, knew that. And the government, when it first filed its motion to unseal, had not even included the transcripts. Judge Engelmeyer then asked for them, looked at them, and said, this was not an investigatory grand jury. It did not hear from victims. It did not hear from witnesses. It heard from a single FBI agent who gave summary testimony about what the investigation had shown. The Department of Justice knew that when it went into court and sought to unseal those. This was what both Judge Engelmeyer and Judge Berman said. This was a diversion to try to blame on the courts the lack of information coming out to the public.
Joining us now, Vice President of Mercury Public Affairs and former White House Deputy Director of Platforms, Megan Coyne. She's also served as the social media director for New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy's office. Also with us, Democratic strategist and MSNBC political analyst Basil Smikle, staff writer for The Atlantic and author of its newsletter Galaxy Brain, Charlie Wartzel, and Politico's senior national politics correspondent Adam Wren. Everybody, thank you for joining us. All right, Basil, I'm going to begin with you on this. What do you think?
You're right. It's provocative, it's ostentatious, and it meets the moment. I think if you're looking for something for him to do that is intellectually stimulating, that's great. But what's better is that there's an emotional reaction, even if it's just a laugh, even if it's like that, that's crazy, because it got you to do something and react to politics in a way that you may not have done before. And it is true that it does hold up a mirror to what's happening on the right, because if you're saying to yourself, why the heck would he do that, Donald Trump? Why would he post that? Why would he do this? To be able to turn it back around and say, well, do you see how ridiculous this is? This is our politics today. Now, you're right. It is a campaign strategy. I don't know that this works a year from now. But for this moment, given all of the heavy stuff that we're dealing with, it does seem to be breaking through.
Adam, give me a little bit more of the background.
Yeah, so what's interesting, Katie, is that this actually came from former Governor Jerry Brown's own social media account, and the Newsom people took it over. And, Newsom has been studying MAGA media, whether it's reading Breitbart or watching One America News for years now, and really sort of reverse engineered the AI, slop that goes to the top of the X algorithm. This is Elon Musk's social media company, and the For You tab essentially prizes this kind of AI slop, these memes that we're seeing. And Newsom figured that out, and he's got a team of about 4 or 5 people who work on this for him. He sort of leads the effort, and they've seen a massive, inundation of followers, about 30 to 50,000 new followers a day since August 1st. And, what's interesting is he actually can't take this account with him. So if he runs for president in 2028, he loses it on January 4th of 2027. And so it's fascinating to kind of see him really game the algorithm, figure out how to talk to both Republicans and Democrats in a way no other 2028 Democrat has.
Megan, you got a lot of attention for Phil Murphy's social media feed. I think the Times did a profile on you a few years back. What do you think, as somebody who has been in charge of this very arena before?
I think that Governor Newsom is absolutely showing us all a masterclass right now in how government social media should be functioning. It's funny, it's quick, it's culturally relevant, it's cutting through the noise, and it's landing. And it's sort of a win-win because it's energizing Democrats while really frustrating Republicans. They're sort of not sure how to react to someone meeting them where they are and copying their playbook. And Democrats really aren't used to someone standing up, calling Republicans out constantly and landing punch after punch after punch without flinching. And that's exactly what Governor Newsom's doing right now, and that's why it's just so exciting to see.
So, Charlie, he's gaining followers, obviously. We're seeing, as Adam pointed out, just a daily count of followers that's going up and up. It's obviously getting a lot of attention. It's on this show. They're talking about it on Fox. It's everywhere, at least today. How is it playing online, though? Beyond the extra follower count, what's the reaction online?
I think it's really just cheap attention, right? I feel like this isn't really, there is a strategy here, which is to, sort of parrot back this and make the people on Fox News look ridiculous and essentially get attention. But, in terms of like a political strategy, it feels kind of thin, right? It feels very, again, Trump's whole social media presence, his whole presidency, his whole self is very, ego-driven, egocentric, kind of, ridiculous. And this is just kind of aping that, right? This is done by somebody who clearly very much wants to be president. He very much wants the attention. And it has this kind of, cathartic bit to it. But a lot of people that I have seen online are also like, this is very, look at me, right? This isn't organizing. This isn't, really putting forth a message. This is just kind of, pointing and criticizing, and that's fine. But I think when you compare it to, another person whose social media strategy has been really in the conversation lately is Zohran Mamdani in New York in the mayoral race. And that social media strategy is different. It situates him in the city among the people he's trying to govern. And I think that there's a real comparison here. I think it's kind of thin, honestly.
I think that's something to talk about. I think you're right about that, because Donald Trump, I'm sure we were arguing about how thin this was back in 2015, 2016, or how ridiculous or how absurd or how unelectable or childish he seemed. But it was all also a part of who Donald Trump is. It was authentically him. He is this person that you see online. He is self-obsessed. He does talk very brashly. He is offensive, fly by his seat, reactionary. Gavin Newsom is not Donald Trump.
Right.
I mean, Gavin Newsom would probably say and happily say he is not Donald Trump. Zohran Mamdani is being his authentic self online, which is working for him. So is there a risk here? Gavin Newsom, it's funny, it's trolling.
Well, it's not a long-term strategy. I think, to your point, you used the term, I think it was culturally relevant.
Yeah.
It is in this moment, but it's not a long-term strategy to get your message out. I mean, I think it's just a moment where, in the midst of everything that we're dealing with, he's breaking through because we're talking about him. And that's important now. Now, can that be sustained? I don't know.
Press is bad press?
Yes. And I mean, if the point is, Adam's point, it's look at me. Well, that is a lot of what politics is. It's look at me. Give me that moment, and then let me take you from here to there.
So how do you transition, Megan? Because, I mean, as Adam pointed out, he can't carry over this account. He's going to have to start again if he has a campaign, launches his campaign next year.
Yeah, you typically don't. You transition over to the next governor. The followers transition over. The content gets wiped. I think that Governor Newsom has built up his brand enough that losing this account won't be a huge setback. Since his name is getting out there, I imagine that this is translating over to his personal political account that he gets to keep with him. It's not like he's going to lose everything when he no longer has this account.
Yeah, but how do you use that the strategy that he's employing of this, making fun of Donald Trump, the trolling of Donald Trump, and also anybody who tries to come after him? He's been trolling Fox News, Dana Perino. He's been trolling Kid Rock. I mean, anybody who tries to come after him, he posts back just in the same way that Donald Trump does. How do you take that, though, and then say, this is satire, this is me trying to show you how ridiculous this is, but now listen to me be serious. Now listen to my policy.
Yeah, there's absolutely a way for him to do that. I think we saw this last week when he held his press conference on redistricting. He's moving forward with it. He's not all talk and not following it up with any action. And I'm sure that they'll continue to balance that, and it helps draw people in. So he is doing all of these crazy, ridiculous, fun things. It draws people in, and then they're going to see more of the serious from him. He's a very accomplished governor, so people are going to be seeing a lot more of that in their feeds.
So the people that are maybe seeing it, Adam, are they going to be beyond the Democrats? Is it going to be the folks the Democrats need? The Times had a great takeout today showing that voter registration for Democrats, and Basil, I'll get you on this, is plummeting. I mean, they're just hemorrhaging voters every single year. New registration for new voters. They're not coming out as Democratic. They're not ticking the Democratic box. So is this reaching those folks?
Yeah, you know, what's interesting is I talked to a New Hampshire Democrat, Jim Demers, whose job it is with Stand Up New Hampshire to sort of bring some of these 2028 candidates to this early primary state. And he told me that in the context of redistricting, Newsom is really breaking through to Democratic primary voters there. They see him as a counterweight to Donald Trump. They see him as a Democrat who is fighting Trump. And this X account, I think, is of a piece with that. It's framing him as someone who is taking Trump head on. Two people in the arena. The White House is officially responding to it with their own memes. And so I think it's breaking through beyond just people who are super online. And, real early state primary voters are hearing of what Newsom's doing around redistricting. They like it. And the X account sort of dovetails with that in a way that does break through.
Basil?
No, I think that's right. And look, there were two things that I heard earlier in my career that I apply to this moment, and that question about where Democrats are in the registration. One, that every movement becomes an institution. And two, this is from my former Congressmember Charlie Rangel, who said that Harlem is not just a place, it's a state of mind. And I think that's where we are with the Democrats today. Number one, I think voters want someone to fight for them. It's not just it's not a brand in the way that it used to be. But they want to find something to be a part of and to connect to. And I think Gavin Newsom's doing a little bit.
It used to be the Democrats were the cool set, for a long time. No, seriously.
That's right.
You were a celebrity, you wanted to be a Democrat. Obama certainly made it cool. But even during the Bush years, there was a certain cachet you got with being a Democrat. But it seems to have been lost entirely over the past 5-10 years.
Plus, voters want somebody to fight for them, number one, and that's critical. But the movement to institution part is also critical because I got involved because I saw Jesse Jackson fighting, saying that the party doesn't represent people like him, that the people that look like me. And at some point, some of those folks got comfortable. And I think people saw that. They saw the party transition, and maybe the younger voter felt that there were too many people who felt too complacent to really fight for them. And that's an important thing that, as a party leader, you're going to have to contend with.
All right. Everyone, besides Adam, you're sticking around. Adam, thank you so much for joining us at the top of the show today. I appreciate it. We hope to have you back.